Hey friends, Dave Paulides, Canadian Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. And this is a segment on missing people. And it's going to be a big one. So, start off with talking about something that you know is near and dear to my heart, mental illness. And Naomi Judd just recently died. Several years ago, she wrote an article for People magazine about mental illness. And I want you to hear it. And if you have family members that have a mental illness, I think it's important that they hear it. It was written with her physician, Daniel Weinberger. And it discusses how suicide is actually one of the leading causes of preventable death. Every year, this is written by her and her physician, every year almost 45,000 people give up hope and commit suicide. A painful act we stop to ponder every September during National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. In 2018, we witnessed several high-profile celebrity suicides, a staggering new data. 30% rise in the number of people taking their own lives since 1999. These numbers pale in comparison to those bereft by suicide, often called suicide loss survivors, making it more critical than ever to shine a spotlight on this highly stigmatized mental health concern. In June, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs released data showing that veteran suicide numbers are significantly higher than non-veterans and are not declining. These reports have set off alarms on social media, with numerous blogs and Facebook testimonials highlighting people's struggles with depression and others sharing the loss of family members and friends. As a singer who chronicled a lifetime battle with mental illness in their book, River of Time, My Descent into Depression and How I Emerged with Hope, and a physician who has spent decades researching cures for mental disorders, we find the statistics devastating. And the recent deaths of chef Anthony Bourdain and designer Kate Spade make clear that no amount of fame or fortune can protect people from the despair that can lead to some of them taking their lives. The statistics in America are shocking. The Center for Disease Control reports that the suicide rate increased to 13.7% per 100,000 people aged 10 and older. And the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs newest numbers find that veterans aged 18 to 34 have a suicide rate more than twice as high as non-veterans, meaning that every day 20 veterans choose to end their lives. Unbelievable. With 45,000 Americans deciding to end their lives every year, suicide is now the 10th leading cause of all deaths in the U.S. And CDC says it's a leading public health threat. For everyone mourning the death of someone who committed suicide, an inevitable question arises: why did this happen? Unfortunately, we don't have very good answers. We do know that suicidal behavior accompanies many behavioral brain disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, as in Ben, and depression. Suicide is actually one of the leading causes of preventable death among these mental illnesses. Addiction is another common brain disorder in people who commit suicide, with around 40% having abused alcohol and about 25% having a history of illicit substance abuse. But even here, we know that we lack complete answers. When the CDC released their latest numbers, they noted that almost half of the people who died by suicide did not have a diagnosed mental illness. Currently, a disproportionate amount of research focuses on suicide as a sociological and psychological phenomena, but the latest studies on aggression and impulsivity may give us better answers. The website BuzzFeed has a video with almost 7 million views where a man named Kevin Hines talks about how he attempted suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. Quoting, "The millisecond my hand left the rail, I felt instant regret," Hines says. He then adds that, "I thought to myself, no one will know I didn't want to die," end of quotes. Mr. Hines' explanation fits with current scientific thinking that the majority of suicides occur as impulsive acts of aggression with the brain functioning in an altered state. Many suicides happen impulsively and are usually successful if the person has easy access to lethal means such as firearms, poisons, means of self-hanging, or hazardous heights. When researchers have studied people who died by suicide, interviewing family members, physicians, and studying medical records in a process called psychological, they have found those who completed suicide tended to have higher levels of aggression. It is also clear that many studies that suicide runs in families and have some genetic roots. In fact, studies of twins show that 43% of the likelihood of committing suicide is determined by one's genes. While it remains unclear which specific genes contribute to risk of suicidal behavior, family studies have consistently found that suicidal behavior is partially explained by transmission within families of impulsive and aggressive traits, and relatives of suicide completers have been found to have elevated levels of impulsive traits and are themselves more likely to have histories of suicidal behavior. To understand this issue better, we have to bring the study of suicide into mainstream neuroscience and treat the condition like every other brain disorder. People who commit suicide are experiencing problems with mood, impulse control, and aggression, all of which involve discrete circuits in the brain and regulate these aspects of human experience. But we still don't understand how these circuits go haywire in the brain of suicide victims. Most likely, the propensity for specific malfunctions in the relevant brain circuitry begin to form early in the development, perhaps even inside the womb. With brain disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and depression, we have an increasingly rich landscape of research delving into biology and genetics in these diseases, but nothing yet at this level for suicide. We do know, for example, that lithium seems to reduce the likelihood of suicide attempts, but we do not understand the biological mechanism for why this is so. Refocusing suicidal research necessitates public and private collaboration. Right now, about 6 times as many people in the U.S. die by taking their own lives as do from HIV and AIDS or heart disease. But the money to study suicide is lacking. In a recent column in the New York Times, Dr. Richard Friedman highlighted this funding disparity, noting that heart disease researchers receive 29 times the amount of federal funds than suicide prevention scientists. In fact, the federal government spent more money last year to study dietary supplements than to understand why Americans decide to take their lives. It's about time we do better. It was released today that Naomi Judd took her life. What's sad to me is that she lived such a long life. 76 years. Torture. My God. That's horrible. That's just horrible. And with everything that she had around her, it didn't stop her. She left behind a husband, family. It must have been horrendous. That's all I can say. It must have been hell. I heard about her death a couple days ago. But then today the family decided to release why she died. And friends, villagers, we need to look out for each other. It's an epidemic. Suicide is an epidemic. It's horrendous. It's massive. It's much worse than you think. For 2 years now, the CDC has not released suicide statistics. They've never not done this before. And I'm telling you, they won't do it. Because they know that the numbers are off the charts if they're honest. I'm sorry I get emotional like that, but I'm looking at Ben right now. And I know there's a lot of families, there's a lot of people out there watching that are going through the same hell that Naomi went through and Ben went through. And our government would rather study heart disease than study our brain and understand what in the hell is happening. Very frustrating. I know that there's a lot of parents out there like me that are trying to live our lives. I'm trying to put one foot in front of the next. And for every veteran out there, I think about you guys all the time. The VA needs to do better. Our government needs to do better. We do. My prayers to the Judd family. See if I can push on here. Let's go to the first letter. During a conversation with my son, who was an athlete and college age, he mentioned having gone on a jogging trek in the woods with a small group of fellow students recently. My son is also the safety officer for the club and just completed a first aid and cardio cert. I told my son that running in the woods was not a good idea at all because of some of the animals, cats and bears, running triggers their attack instinct, and by the time you discover that you're being stalked or charged, it's almost probably you're too late. Also, running in the woods will lower your awareness of visual movement around you while you're decreasing your ability to hear sounds that might otherwise alert you to the presence of possible predators. And I thought of something else. Let's say you're jogging along on a trail in the woods, and all of a sudden you see a bear up ahead. It's going to take a longer distance to stop than if you were just hiking. Those extra few feet of stopping distance equate to less time between you and the bear, which means less time to properly react. Reach for your bear spray, for example. I asked my son if he had his bear spray with him when they went jogging in the woods, and to my despair he said no. This brings up my final point. A lot of people just think that it will never happen to me, or the probability is too low. Another thing that young kids and young adults often are afraid of looking stupid by having a canister of bear spray on their hip or on their backpack. This fact shows me that, by and large, a lot of individuals are too easily influenced by what others may think, and therefore tend to follow the group norm. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I still see pitifully few people by all ages wearing bear spray. I always carry it. The carrying of bear spray while hiking tends to evolve into being the cool thing to do, and the bear spray industry needs to work real hard at promoting that idea. The national parks themselves could also promote the idea by trail signs, etc. In conclusion, Dave, can you please comment on my belief that jogging in the woods is a dangerous activity? Yeah, it is. And I know a lot of people very close to me do it all the time. And if I condone that, or to you, maybe that would sound bad, but people really close to me do it. So there's a lot of things that are dangerous, and I guess it depends on the woods you're in. But there's a lot of shows you can watch that show that running in the woods can be dangerous. Risk-reward ratio, and some people are going to do it. Some people would say hiking in the woods is dangerous, and I'm going to do that. But if you're running in the woods where there are bear, you better be carrying bear spray. That's all I'll say. Oh boy, this next one. When I was younger, my dad would often take me to work with him. And I'd do all the grunt work. I'd dig the trenches and do the heavy lifting. Looking back, just the way it was. I did it. And oftentimes, riding back and forth with my dad, he'd be listening to AM radio. And the one time I remember listening with my dad that I always enjoyed is when Paul Harvey came on the radio. If you don't know who Paul Harvey is, go to YouTube and listen to him. A very, very wise man. Well, somebody sent me this, and I'm going to read it to you. And that's one of Paul Harvey's minutes. And the title of this one was, If I Was the Devil. If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. And I have 1/3 of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I seized the ripest apple on the tree. So I'd set about however necessary to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good, and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors on how to make lurid literature exciting, so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen in distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild, until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. In his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbols of the Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take those who have and give to those who want until I have killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what do you bet I could get whole states to promote gambling as a way to get rich? I would caution against extremes in hard work and patriotism in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, and what you see on the TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, If I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day. Wow. I read that, I was stunned. Stunned. I read this on the radio in 1965. The one where if I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until in turn each were consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. You know, you think, I've heard so many things about families at war with themselves. People not talking to each other, families not talking to each other. Friends, let me tell you something. There's nothing in the world that would stand between myself and me loving my kids. Nothing. It comes with just being a dad. You forgive. You're patient. You're accepting of others' ideas and thoughts. The thought that my idea is the right idea, my thoughts are the right idea, and my way is the only way. That's stupidity, folks. You have to have an open dialogue to convince people to even look at your way. Thank you to the person who sent me Paul Harvey's Devil. Great job, sir. This is the new letter. I'll make this short. 2006, guided by forces and coincidence to go to Israel. I walked in the southern desert, got my scuba ticket in the Red Sea. I think today the Mossad was trying to recruit me was a very strange trip that would take way too long to explain the strangeness that walked in my mind and still does today. Work and recreation, mostly hockey. So me and my Jewish friend are lost in Old Jerusalem. Night, cold, drizzling. Girlfriend is freaking out. You're going to get me killed. Around the corner in traditional Munkatar comes this guy with a Coleman lamp, wondering if we were okay. Well, I start talking to him in English with my Albertan accent. He asks me, where are you from? I tell him Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He says, whoa, me too. I'm like, really? He says he runs a church in Castle Downs, part of our city. I look him in the eyes and ask if it is the church across from the rec center where I work in Castle Downs. He says, yes. Dave, I was speechless. And he told us how to find East Gate. My friend just kept muttering, that was a ghost. Just listening to your Israeli show while working on my plane, scale plane 35cc, going through my boxes for plane parts, I find this item by mere chance. A key ring given to me in Israel by the oldest rabbi at the time. He passed when I left for home. Just made me think of my time there was weird to say the least. Prayers to you and the family. We come from the same world. Thanks, your friend Kim. There's a picture of what they sent on the key ring of the old rabbi. It's kind of strange. You ever think you were just destined to find that? Wow. Next letter. Hey Dave, I watched Missing 411 in the spring of 2021 and found your YouTube channel this week. Despite spending numerous summers in the Yellowstone National Park area and growing up in the shadows of Shenandoah Park, I'd never heard of any of those strange disappearances of people going missing in parks, cave systems, or other remote locations. I'm currently completing a PhD in education with a focus on data analysis. I know you have considered time, but I'm curious if you have considered seasons, months, days of the week, holidays significant to religions, tribes, ley lines, latitudinal lines, etc. Are there any disappearances where an individual is with their dog, horse, or another companion animal, maybe an animal that would be another means of protection like a gun or locator beacon? So, in the back of almost every book, there is a table that has all the missing people and their dates of disappearances. And then at the end of that, I do an analysis on the dates, etc. And then in Missing 411 Eastern U.S., almost all of the children I talked about that went missing in Pennsylvania were with a dog, which I thought was very odd. Is temperature a factor? No. It doesn't matter what temperature is, you can disappear. Yes, I have yet to read your books, so my apologies. Friday, a possible story. Finally, a possible story. My grandfather was an airplane and blimp mechanic in World War II. At first he was a trainer in Louisiana, but after about a year he was transferred to the Philippines. He was assigned to a naval aircraft carrier which was stationed on a remote, though populated island in southern Philippines. After a few months he worked his way up to being the commanding officer's personal mechanic and often went to Manila as supporting personnel for the CO. He loved this role, as he was in charge of the mailbag and ran a decent black market sourcing service between the camp and the mainland to include finding items like fruit, chocolate, and new boots. Entrepreneur type. Once and only once he told me a strange story for a school project over 50 years after the event, so some details are missing due to the time, and that was not a pleasant memory for him. On one of those trips to Manila, he was not able to ride in the plane back for a reason which he admitted was strange. Though he forgot the reason and was forced to take a 3-day trip on a small ferry shipping boat back to the base. He mentioned that only one person spoke to him while on the boat, a mystic who said some strange words to him. After these words, he experienced lost time, feeling as if he had been drugged, nightmares, and general unrest for many days to years after his service. He did not recall getting off the boat, as his next memory was of doing something in camp days after he supposedly arrived. His crewmates acted as if nothing was wrong, and they had been behaving normally. For the remainder of his service, he stated that he was troubled by this event and refused to take such travel arrangements in the future. After service, he required sleeping medicine for many years to stop the nightmares. He only told me the story once, and that was enough to make him feel uneasy and bothered. He never brought up the topic ever again, and asked me to kindly never mention such in his presence either. Now, during this trip, I'm not certain he was in uniform or carrying his issued pistol, as that might have made him a possible target. Your work is inspiring. Thank you for your efforts. Well, thank you for the story. That's interesting. Dave, before I tell you my story, I want to say thank you so much for your work and to shed some light on this situation. What you do is so important and an eye-opener to the public. You have helped so many, and I will be helping lots more, including me and my family. So thank you much from the bottom of my heart. My story is from 2020, so it's very recent, but I feel it's connected to 2 encounters from my childhood. So I'm going to start here. I'm from Norway, and in my 30s now. Our old house was built between the mountains, the forest right outside our door, and the ocean maybe 100 meters down the house. I always had a really special relationship with the forest. I would just go in there, find my spot, and sit there for hours in silence, just existing. I would do this as early as 6 and until I moved to the city at 16. I'm getting off track, so I'll get back to my story. My first encounter was when I was about 6 or 7. I have a little brother who's 3 years younger than me, and when he was around 3, he suddenly got an imaginary friend. Don't remember this imaginary friend's exact name, but it was something like Aridi, and it was a male figure. My brother could be in his room having conversations with such Aridi, and at first my mother didn't think much of it until she asked my brother about his new friend. My brother would tell her that Aridi wasn't from here, but never specified his origins. He would tell her that he came in a flying car and picked up my brother so he could look down on all the houses in the neighborhood. The weird thing about that is that he could tell my mother about things in people's yards and he wouldn't know. He would tell her how cold it was outside when they were up in the stars. He would also say that Arity would come and give him a light ball if he was scared of the dark at night, and that this light ball would make him sleepy and not scared anymore. All of a sudden he stopped talking about Arity, and my mother asked a little carefully about it, and my brother told her that he had to go home, but he's coming back, and that's the last time we ever heard of him. About a year later, I was with my mother and we were driving somewhere. Don't remember exactly where, but it was during the daytime. I remember looking out the passenger window and seeing what I thought was a very bright glowing star. I thought it was weird because I believed stars were sleeping during the day. So I was looking at it curiously, then it started to move back and forth over and over. Of course now I'm more curious because why is the star dancing? I told my mom to look at the dancing star, but she didn't see it. I thought that was really weird because it was so bright and moving. It was impossible not to see it. She even stopped the car to look because I was yelling at her to look at it. She still never saw it. She started the car back up and kept driving, and I'm basically glued to the window looking at the star. We entered a forested area and I lost sight of the star and I felt upset about it. All of a sudden the star had moved towards us and I could see it again. I felt like it wanted to follow me since I thought it was beautiful. It kept at a distance but stayed with the car so I could see it. It's still looking like a big glowy star at this point, so I'm entranced. My mother is getting really worried about my behavior over something she can't see, and that I'm really overexcited by it. Just as we were about to exit the forested area, the star speeds up towards us and went above the car and continued to the north on the driver's side. This is when I could see the star up close. It was not a star. It was something metallic, dark in color, dark grayish, had lights all around it. The shape was more oval than round, and it wasn't very big. I remember thinking to myself, oh, Arity's back. And as an adult now, I'm thinking, how would I know that? Arity was my brother's friend. I never saw him or interacted with him. Not that I remember, at least. So the recent experience, I was sleeping on the couch, which I often did after a long day, and I woke up and could not move. I was completely paralyzed. I was freaking out, but I was trapped inside my body. I suddenly heard some weird noises behind me. Someone or something was snooping around in my closet drawers and cabinets. I couldn't see them, and they were behind me only to hear them. I was scared and confused, and I spent all my energy trying to scream or move, but it was to no avail. All of a sudden, the noises stopped, and I could feel was something breathing in my hair. It felt more like when an animal is smelling you than a person. This thing had a weird smell to it, and I have nothing to compare it to. Closest thing I could think of is a combo of a wet dog and a brand new car tire. I know it sounds weird, and it was. This thing made some throaty sound, not exactly growling, but like a growl, purr type sound. I felt the aggression radiating from it, and I was scared. My tears were falling, and I was losing my mind. Suddenly, a big door opened up on my wall. There is no door on that wall, but here it was. And a humanoid entity stood sort of sideways looking out at me. It was tall, very tall. Didn't have any facial or body features and didn't say anything. It was just looking at me. It made me a tiny gesture with its head, and another one showed up on the door. Now there were two. The one behind me had gone silent. It was gone. It was not the same as the ones in the door. I didn't feel it was as tall as them. It felt smaller and meaner. The two felt kind and protective in a way. I felt like they came to protect me and remove whatever that was in my room. They didn't have eyes, but I knew they were looking at me. My eyes started to go blurry and unfocused, and the door slowly melted away from existence. The second this door was gone, I could move again, and I speed dialed my mom and had her come over. I told her what happened, and she said I probably had a night terror or sleep paralysis. No, I was awake. She was adamant that I must have dreamt, because apparently I had described Arity when I told her about the humanoids. I didn't believe her, so I asked my brother what Arity looked like without telling him anything about what happened. And he told me he looks like a human, just very tall and has no face. He's like a blank canvas, exactly what I saw. I never told him about this experience I had, and never told anyone but my mom. Even though it happened to me, I don't believe it. My mind is struggling to comprehend that this happened. I'm not sure if it's my own defense mechanism or something else influencing my comprehension. It's a really weird feeling. I've been following Missing 411 since the fall of 2021 when I stumbled across Mr. Ballin's YouTube series about your work and books. What you do is amazing, and I hope more and more people join this movement for the truth and the safety of everyone's everywhere. Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Never stop being you, because you are the fire and the light the public needs to guide them. Much love and support. Wow. I'm humbled. It's quite a story. I've heard many stories very similar to that. People frozen in bed. I've heard stories, hundreds of stories, where somebody was frozen in bed, just like she explained, and they had a spouse next to him, and they couldn't wake him up. Screaming, yelling, nothing. They were just there. They never moved. Yeah. I think these things happen much more than we understand. Why? I don't know. Why was Air Day visiting the brother? What was the purpose in the visit? I don't know. Well, I have 3 stories for you today, all from the same area of California. Not an area that most people even ever talk about. It's the Los Padres National Forest in the Sespe wilderness. And the stories are each mind-boggling in and of themselves. First story involves a young girl, Jill Hatch, 7 years old. Her mom, and dad lived in Santa Barbara, a very wealthy community. This happened November 2nd, 1957, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They came to an area called Camp Scheideck, Scheideck. At the time, it was a small resort on Reyes Creek. And the resort sat at the base of Reyes Peak at 7,510 feet. Hatches arrived late afternoon on a Friday, about a 2.5 hour drive from their home. And they took those 3 and Chips, the Cocker Spaniel. Well, Saturday morning, the family woke up, had breakfast, and the real reason they came to this area was the fishing. And the resort offered special fishing in the creek that was stocked. And Mr. Hatch said, yeah, I'm going to fish right in this area at camp in the morning, and then sometime at 11 I'm going to go upstream and fish some more. At about 11 o'clock, he got a hold of his daughter and said, hey, I'm going to go upstream. You're going to stay with your mom or come with me? And she goes, I'm going to come with you, and I'll take the dog with us. So Chips, Jill, and Mr. Hatch went upstream. And they went up several hundred yards. And then Jill and Chips sat on a big boulder. And Mr. Hatch went up another 100 yards and fished. He said he was gone about 20 minutes. And he came back, and Jill and the dog were gone. And that was unusual. She usually stayed where she was, and the dog never went anywhere, just stayed with Jill. That was what the dog was all about. Well, searched around the area. They thought, well, maybe she went downstream to the camp. It was an easy walk. Went downstream, got to the wife. The wife said, no, I haven't seen her or the dog. They searched and searched. And eventually, at about 4 o'clock that afternoon, they went to the U.S. Forest Service office nearby. And just as they were leaving for the Forest Service office, Chips walks into camp. Think about that. Dog had never been to the area, yet walked right back to camp without Jill. So the U.S. Forest Service rallies resources immediately. Hamilton Air Force Base sends a helicopter. Bloodhounds, horses, ATVs, everything's coming into the area. They're not finding anything. Bloodhounds aren't picking up a scent. They're not finding Jill. But just as the Forest Service officer is leaving his office with the hatches at 5 o'clock, it starts raining and snowing. More snow than rain. So searchers show up the next morning, they search all day and aren't finding anything. 28 hours after Jill disappears, searchers are at the top of Reyes Peak at 7,500 feet. And they're coming down. And just below the summit, on a very steep hill, they find Jill laying on the hillside. Like she's crawling up the hill, but she's deceased. She has her heavy coat tied around her waist, and she's deceased. And she's in new snow is all around her. She's 3,500 feet above the creek where her and her dad were fishing. She's 5 miles from camp, and she crossed 2 hills to get to the location where she was at. The coroner stated that she died of exposure, but that it was impossible to know, per them. Now, why did I tell you this story? First of all, water and boulders were everywhere around that creek where she disappeared. Elevation. A 7-year-old is not going to crawl up the side of a steep mountain for 3,500 feet. I don't care who you are. That is not happening. She knew the exact way back to camp. Obviously, the dog did. She knew. Just follow the stream. What happened? Bloodhounds didn't pick up a scent. So what happened? Yeah, it bothers me. This case always bothers me. There's 3 cases in this same area. I'm going to tell you a couple of them. So, this is Thousand Oaks, California. This is the area we're talking about. This is where Jill disappeared. It's about 12 miles between here and another location where Mike Herdman disappeared. And then between the 2 locations is another location where someone else disappeared. That disappearance happened right here. Very, very close to, right in between the other 2. Again, this is a map of the area. This is LA. Next case is a very, very famous case that I doubt you even heard of. But it involves this man, Ronald Hughes. Oh, maybe some of you can rack your brain and remember who Mr. Hughes was. But Mr. Hughes was 35 years old. He went missing November 29th, 1970 at Sespe Hot Springs. Who was Mr. Hughes? He was the attorney for Leslie Van Houten, one of the Manson killers. They were at trial, in the middle of trial, on the Tate LaBianca murders. And they had gone through most of the trial. And after Thanksgiving holiday, Hughes didn't come back for court. Judge got mad, as judges do, and he issued a body attachment warrant for Ronald Hughes. And he ordered the LA County Sheriffs to send their fugitive unit into the woods to find him. Well, they knew that Ronald Hughes liked to go to Sespe Hot Springs. It was a place he always went. Kind of escaped the craziness of LA. And on this incident, he went with 2 17-year-old friends. Just the way it was. Well, on that weekend, it started to rain really heavy. And that Saturday, the 2 17-year-old friends said, hey, we're leaving. But their car got stuck. And in the car were transcripts of the trial and Ron's sleeping bag. Well, the kids found a way out with some other people, but Ron said he wanted to stay. It wasn't going to be that bad. Well, when the sheriff's unit figured out that he was missing, they threw a ton of resources. Hundreds of people went into the area. Well, that Monday, when the judge was issuing the body attachment warrant, there were 14 people that were rescued in this area because of torrential rains. Well, the sheriffs got to interview the 17-year-olds, and they told the story. And they said that they last saw him when he said, yeah, I'm going to go back to the car. I'm going to get my transcripts, and I'll review them. And when I can leave, I'll get out of here. But people will know. Well, the sheriffs didn't quite believe the teens and asked them if they'd take polygraphs. They voluntarily did. They were telling the truth. So where was Ron? Well, they searched from December 2nd to December 14th. Massive search in the area. Didn't find him. Didn't see anybody else that saw him. Now, he was considered a very, very reliable sort. Wasn't ever late for court before. Took his job very seriously. So seriously that he was reviewing transcripts while he was on this weekend. So they find the car. They find the transcripts inside. And they find his sleeping bag inside. And it kind of told the deputies at the time that Ron must not have made it to the car, because that doesn't make any sense. So fast forward almost 4 months. March 29th, 1971. Two fishermen are in an area called the Narrows. It's an area where the Sespe Creek goes into a narrow canyon, and the fishing is pretty good. About 7 miles east of Sespe Hot Springs. And the fishermen are walking along, and they see a body between two boulders in the creek. It's face down, and it's nude. And it's missing one arm. Well, that was pretty odd. So it took them a couple days to get in there, so the fishermen come out, notify law enforcement. They go in, they recover the body. And the coroner gets a hold of it and says that it's very badly decomposed. Well, the odd thing is that in interviews, the fishermen said that they didn't think the body was very decomposed. So that was a pretty big discrepancy. The coroner stated that they couldn't prove that Ron died of a heart attack, which he didn't. They couldn't prove that he drowned. And there was no signs of violence to the body. Okay, so maybe there wasn't violence to the body. Well, folks, what happened to his left arm? Now, maybe that was part of the decomposition process. Maybe he was being washed down in the creek and boulders, etc., knocked his arm off. I don't know. But when you look at the totality of this case, that the canines that they brought into that area when he first disappeared never picked up his scent from the car. Nobody saw him after the teenagers left and he told them he was going back to the car. And one other person saw him going towards that car. But that was it. And missing clothing, being in water. A lot of things just didn't make sense about this case. But again, this case was maybe 8 miles from where Jill Hatch disappeared. And in the giant scheme of life, that's pretty darn close. Now, one thing I've said, that if we have 3 disappearances in 3 years from essentially the same location, it's going to raise a lot of questions and a lot of suspicion. But if we spread it out over years and years, all of a sudden people's memories become a little hazy. And now, Hughes disappeared in 1970, 71 almost. And you fast forward 44, 45 years, you have another really strange disappearance that occurred in the Sespe wilderness right next door, about 8 miles away. So, back to the map. Again, this is where Jill Hatch disappeared at Camp Scheideck. And then Mike Herdman disappeared in the Sespe wilderness right along Sespe Creek. Now, who is Mike Herdman? Mike Herdman is your stand-up, all-American man. The kind of friend everybody wanted. And I'm telling you, he was a good person. Mike went missing June 13th, 2014, Sespe Wilderness. He was 36 years old. Ron Hughes was 35 years old. Mike was outstanding physical condition. He was a graduate of Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, majored in animal sciences. And that's where he met his wife, Bridget, and they eventually had a little girl. In 2007, he joined the Arcadia Fire Department as a firefighter paramedic. I've talked to you about paramedics before. Salt of the earth, great people. See things that most of us never want to see in life. Mike liked to surf, bicycle, hike. And Mike and his wife Bridget had one young daughter. On June 11th, Mike and a firefighter friend named Taylor Byers decided to go take a weekend hiking trip into the Sespe wilderness. The idea was to take a 4-day hike, 2 in, 2 out, and they were going to bring Mike's dog, Duke, which they did. Both men were physical specimens. A hike of that nature really not that tough. And again, if you understand Mike, and you understand young paramedics like that, getting out into the wilderness is an escape. Leaving your thoughts behind, leaving your issues behind. It was good. Well, on June 13th, Mike and his dog, Duke, and Taylor are in camp. And all of a sudden, Duke takes off running. Just takes off. And Mike takes off running after him. And Taylor takes off running after Mike. Taylor says that Mike took off running and he was wearing no shoes, no socks, just shorts and a shirt. And the chase was on for a while. And Taylor says somehow they got separated. And Taylor searched all that night, and the next morning, Mike didn't show up. Duke didn't show up. And Taylor then hikes out for 2 days to get help. Well, the Ventura County Sheriff's Office threw tons of resources at this. And the Arcadia Fire Department sent an entire fire crew and rescue crew out to look for their firefighter. It's very weird. I wrote about this in Missing 411 in the books. One of the stories that came out at the time, and I was following this very closely. This was right in the middle of my research, and I knew from the get-go this was an unusual case, and I was going to follow it copiously. Well, day 5, searchers said that they heard strange noises coming from a cave in the area. And they went to the cave, and they didn't find anything. And Mike wasn't there. But I wrote about that. On June 19th, a search and rescue member was bitten by a rattlesnake and had to be medically evacuated and given antivenom to save their lives. June 22nd, they found Duke running near the trailhead where their cars were parked, near Doe Flat. And with the help of Bridget, they were able to capture Duke. Now, for this entire time, for almost 12 days, helicopters flew the same route from their base into the wilderness to search. Helicopter pilot said that after making dozens of flights into the same area on the same path, with everybody looking out the window, on that same path, on a cliff below them, they saw a body they had never seen before. Well, they drop people in, and it's Mike. And it was described as an extremely rugged area that you'd have to climb a super high mountain to get to the area where he was found, and he was below a cliff. Still had bare feet. They didn't describe the condition of the feet. Now, he died June 24th. Did you hear that? Died June 24th. Friends, that's 11 days after he disappeared. He had no supplies. What was he eating? What was he drinking? How in the heck did searchers miss him for 11 days? Remember, Mike was a search and rescue person. He knew what to do. He knew how to make himself apparent. He knew searchers were looking for him. How did he not get found? Where was he during this time? But that's not it. Because searchers, or the coroner also stated that there was a small amount of alcohol and drugs in his system. Okay, time out. I know a little bit about alcohol because when I was a police officer, I went to a lot of classes to understand alcohol ingestion, drunk driving, etc. So let's say you're a guy like Mike, you're 6'1", 200 pounds. You drink a 12-ounce beer. An hour, when you finish consuming that 12-ounce beer, 1 hour later, that 0.02 percentage of alcohol in your system is gone. Alcohol doesn't stick around in the body very long unless you're consuming massive amounts. But Mike didn't have any alcohol. And he didn't have any drugs on him that they knew about. Now, they did find something in camp that they wouldn't talk about, but Mike hadn't been to camp in 11 days. What was going on? A lot of people always ask, well, Dave, are people ever found under circumstances where they were alive at some period of time while they were being searched for? And I've told you before that, yes, this has happened, but it's very rare. This is one of those cases. Now, in the slightest realm of normality, is this normal? No. Taylor couldn't begin to answer these questions because it wasn't there. But friends, you can survive maybe 3 days without water. Maybe. Now, Mike survived 11. Now, there was the creek there, and there's a good possibility he had water from the creek. But 11 days without food is pushing the outer limits of reality. So how did he survive? What was in his stomach? Coroner never released that. And those are key things. What was the condition of his feet? Were they bruised, cut, like they should have been 11 days in the woods chasing his dog? I don't know. The whole story has bothered me. And remember, June 22nd, Duke was found. But Mike was still alive. Why wasn't Duke with Mike? Why would those two be separated? Again, folks, it makes no sense. I'll tell you what ripped my heart right out of my chest is I remember watching the services for Mike Herdman. And let me tell you, seeing his wife and his daughter, horrible. Something happened out there that is unexplainable. I'm not sure if the family understands it. I'm not even sure if the firefighters are willing to acknowledge it. But the facts are the facts. Something strange happened to Mike Herdman. Something strange happened to make Duke run off. And for Duke not to come back to Mike after a reasonable period of time is not normal. For search and rescue not to find Mike Herdman is not normal. Those are 3 cases in the Los Padres National Forest. I want you to understand that I give you the facts. I don't know what happened here. I don't know what happened on any of these cases, but they're not normal. Extreme examples of extreme events in the outdoors. If you can, say a prayer for Bridget Herdman, and Bridget, Mike's daughter. We need more souls like Mike Herdman. You can't lose many of these great people. Paulides out.